and welcome to the Plant School podcast. I'm Rachel Tenney, and here we learn all about plants, how they work, how to care for them, and it's all taught in a way that anyone from beginner to expert can listen to, understand, and enjoy. So I hope that you will join me in Plant School. Hello and welcome to the Plant School podcast. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about what scientists have recently discovered about houseplants. This is a new episode idea that I had just a few weeks ago, and basically what it is I have scoured Google Scholar, and I have been reading up on all these houseplant studies, and I have chosen the most interesting houseplant studies. For example, did you know that your houseplants may be helping you eat healthier food? These are the kind of studies that I'm talking about. So I chose 6 studies to talk with you today, and of course there are so many more. This could probably become a series. So for this episode, we're going to go through 6 that I found most interesting, like the one that I mentioned before about houseplants influencing your eating habits. Before we get into that, I just have a few things to do. So first is our giveaway winners. This is something I do in every single podcast episode. I choose 2 people to win a gift card to a houseplant store of their choice. It could be local to them, it could be a big box store, just wherever you like to shop for houseplants. I will send you a gift card to that place so that you may go have a fun plant shopping trip on me. If that sounds like fun to you, there are 2 ways to enter. So number 1 is for my Spotify listeners. If you scroll down on the most recent episode, so for today's episode, just scroll down on this. There is a place to leave a comment. You can comment anything you would like, and that automatically enters you in for the next episode's giveaway. Or if you are listening on Apple Podcasts, go ahead and leave a written review for this podcast, and that will automatically enter you in. You can do both of those things if you want, and you can comment as many weeks as you want in a row on Spotify. That is something you can do again and again. So starting with our winner on Spotify, their name is Haley Farnsworth, and she said, I love this podcast and have recently been binging it. So helpful and informative and also calming. When I listened to the episode about peperomias, I looked them up and fell in love. I ended up getting a cayenne peperomia from a local plant store. I have an almost 2-year-old son, and finding time for myself as a new mom has been really tough for me, but listening to this podcast and learning all about plants has been amazing for me. Thank you for doing what you do. Thank you, Haley, for that really kind comment. I have a lot of empathy in my heart for you as a new mom. I started this podcast as a new mom, and it can be a really challenging time. And I feel like this podcast and my little YouTube channel about houseplants did bring me a whole lot of comfort, helped me feel like myself. So for you, Haley, I hope that houseplants can do the same thing for you. But thank you again for commenting. If you could go ahead and email me at tennyplants@gmail.com, we can connect over there and I can send you a gift card your way. And then moving over to Apple Podcast, the person who left a review and won today, their username is Rachel in PGH. And she said, thank you for this helpful information. My rubber tree came from one of my grandfather's funeral arrangements, so it's special to me. But it keeps dropping its lower leaves. I appreciate learning to care for it better. Oh, Rachel, that is so special to have a houseplant with such a deep personal connection. I hope that episode gives you the information that you need to keep that rubber tree in your home and your family for years and years, and can be that sweet reminder of your grandfather. That is so special. Rachel, go ahead and email me at tennyplants@gmail.com, and I will get a gift card sent your way as well. And again, if you would like to win a gift card to go on a plant shopping trip, comment on Spotify, leave a review on Apple Podcasts, do both of those if you would like, and tune in for the next episode to see if you have won. All right, and then my last announcement is that I am hosting a trip to England. This is happening in May of 2027. We are headed to the Chelsea Flower Show. We are headed to some of my very favorite all-time English gardens. We're going to Charles Darwin's house. It's basically like a very botanically themed English garden trip. If that sounds like something that would be fun to you, if you're interested in it, I'm going to include a link in the show notes where you can check out the full itinerary. You can look at the pricing details. And I even have a special code that will get you $500 off. It is limited, so it won't last forever, but if you type in Plant School in all caps, that will get you $500 off of this trip. and I would absolutely love to have you there. It's going to be such a great time, 8-day trip in May of 2027. And again, the link is in the show notes. All right, so let's get into this episode. So basically, I'm just going to go through these studies one by one. So our first study is about how houseplants affect our well-being. The exact title of this study is Interaction with Nature Indoor: Psychological Impacts of Houseplants' Care Behavior on Mental Well-Being and Mindfulness in Chinese Adults. So this was a study done in China. And one of the reasons why this study came about is because there is a rapid growth of urbanization and there's an increased prevalence of mental problems that are a concern in China. And so they wanted to see if houseplants could help with this, since people may not have as much access as they normally do to nature and to gardens. So the purpose of the study, they stated that it was to examine the psychological effects of keeping houseplants in the home and to examine how connection to nature relates to mental well-being and mindfulness among Chinese adults living in urban areas. So what they did is they got 421 participants, 66% of them were female, and it comprised 19 different Chinese cities, and this is what they found from this survey. It revealed that participants who self-classified themselves as houseplant carers reported higher levels of mental well-being compared with non-houseplant carers. And they noticed a correlation with the hours spent caring for the houseplants, the number of houseplants they had, and the years that they had been keeping those houseplants. So the more you did those three, the more hours spent, the more you had, and the more years you have been doing it, that was positively associated with greater levels of mental well-being and the trait of mindfulness. And I'm sure there was probably a point where the scales would tip. Maybe if you had, over 1,000 houseplants, maybe your mental well-being wouldn't be as great. I don't know what the exact number is. Don't be mad if you have 1,000 houseplants and I just called you mentally unwell. That's not what I meant. But the point is, the more time spent with these houseplants, the more mindful you were and your mental well-being was greater. So the conclusion that they wrote is that this has implications for using houseplants in therapeutic horticulture for people who are seeking to improve their mental well-being and mindfulness in urban China. And that was the conclusion that they had with that. And of course, I think that can be applied to us all, outside of China as well, that as we care for houseplants, it can improve our mental well-being and mindfulness. I thought that was really cool. So moving on to the second study. This one is specifically about the pothos plants and how it has been used as a biofilter to clean our air. So the title of this study is Harnessing the Potential of Epiprimnum aureum, or your pothos, for Indoor Air Purification in Botanical Filters. I didn't even know that there were studies being done on biofilters and, cleaning our air through these, but this is a real thing. So this is what they did. So basically it's almost like a plant wall where they have these containers with soil and pothos plants growing in them, and they force air through the soil and through the leaves of the houseplant to see if they can reduce the VOC concentrations. And VOCs are simply your volatile organic compounds. So they did this over a period of 4 months. They were specifically tracking acetone, pinene, and toluene. They noticed that acetone decreased by 99%, pinene decreased by 83%, and toluene decreased by 71%. And before you try and buy a bunch of pothos plants and make a living wall and put it by your air conditioner outflow or anything like that, just know that this was operated in an internal system with recirculated airflow. So it wasn't an open environment like our homes are. This kind of mimics that infamous NASA study from 1989 where they were testing houseplants in enclosed chambers and if they cleaned the air. And they did find that they did indeed clean the air. And this is kind of the same thing. They're finding that the pothos plant could be perhaps used as a biofilter. But here's the thing that I thought was so interesting. In the study, it continues on to say that, of course, there are microbes in the growing substrate or the soil. And so they removed all the pothos plants out of the soil and they put the air through the containers of soil just like they did before, but this time they had no plants in them, kind of as a control. And this is what they found. Acetone decreased by 97%, whereas before it was 99%. Pining decreased by 50%, whereas before it was 83%. And they didn't track tooling. I couldn't find it in the study. I'm not sure why that wasn't tracked when they just tested the soil. But from that, they concluded that the high abundance of actinobacteria in the growing medium suggests that bacteria also play a huge role in decreasing the VOCs, those volatile organic compounds that are floating through our air and are not necessarily great for our bodies. So from this study, they recommended that future studies should look at different houseplants, but also evaluate the performance of these filters with just the growing medium as well, because it's seeming that the bacteria are also playing a huge role in this. It is not just the plant's leaves and roots that are magically doing all of the work. They're doing some, but the bacteria is also playing a huge role. So this study, I thought it was interesting. Doesn't necessarily mean that our houseplants are cleaning our air. Yeah, in a very small amount, but of course, because our air is flowing in and out every single day, we're not in enclosed systems, it's going to have a very, very small effect. But I thought this was interesting because it kind of points at the bacteria in the soil doing a lot of the heavy lifting. And it's not as glamorous as I think it is that houseplants magically clean our air. It's the bacteria in your houseplant's growing medium is cleaning the air for you. That's not as sexy, but it seems like the bacteria are playing a huge role. All right, let's move on to our third study. This one's about monsteras being able to clean water. So the title of this study is Lead Uptake and Adaptive Responses of Monstera in Polluted Aquatic Environments. So they got some monstera species and they put them in contaminated water. They used spring water, purified water, and surface irrigation water, and they tested different monstera species as well. They used Monstera obliqua, Monstera tetrasperma, and the Monstera carstinanium. And they were looking at a bunch of different factors to determine how well these monsteras were cleaning the water. And what they found is that the Monstera obliqua was the most efficient at getting rid of the lead in the water. It just had an enhanced uptake capacity and seemed to adapt really well to the contaminated water. And from the study, they concluded that there's potential of monsteras, but particularly the Monstera obliqua, as an effective phytoremediation agent for helping in lead contamination in water. And hopefully this study could help in advancing sustainable agricultural biotechnology by using these tropical ornamental plants, your monsteras, as environmental remediation agents in helping the water become cleaner. Again, just a really cool study to show how healing houseplants can be to the environment around us. And of course, this study said, don't use monsteras as a way to clean your water and have it be viable drinking water. That's not what it's saying, but it can help in water that is contaminated with lead in some part. All right, this next study was super interesting. This one showed that plants can make you happier, which I feel like we know, but they also saw that plants can make you more sad. So let's talk about it. This one was really fun. So the title of this study is The Appearance of Indoor Plants and Their Effect on People's Perception of Indoor Air Quality and Subjective Well-Being. So this is what they did for this study. They got 520 participants and they were monitoring their psychological responses. What they would do is they would show them 12 different images of indoor plants and monitor their responses. These plants, they were different in their physical appearance. They weren't all the same picture. Some of these plants were really healthy. Some of them were dead or dying, and they could deem the picture uplifting, interesting, relaxing, or beautiful. All the healthy plants were considered beautiful to some extent and resulted in a positive impact on the subject's well-being. The most preferred plants in this study that people had a positive reaction to were your epiprimnums, your pothos plants, your ficuses, and your palms. They all were perceived to have the highest subjective well-being benefit on a person. So take that for what you will. And then the perceived benefits for indoor air quality, not exactly like we know this plant is helping the air quality, it's just people's perception of it. They looked at the picture and said, oh yeah, the air would seem cleaner if I had this in my home. So they were more strongly associated with healthy plants rather than the plants that were unhealthy. Also, the canopy density of the plant. If it was a really robust and thick and bushy plant, people perceived it as helping the indoor air quality more. Whereas the unhealthy plants negatively affected people's perception of the indoor air quality, and it negatively affected their subjective well-being. So when they would see unhealthy plants, they felt like the air quality was less, wasn't as good, and also they just didn't feel as great when they were seeing these unhealthy plants. So if you have a business or something and you want people's perception of the indoor air quality of this place to be at its maximum, get plants that are lush with bright green leaves and high canopy density. And it also improves subjective well-being of these people, where they see those lush, healthy plants and they feel better. And that was kind of the conclusion that the study made. It wasn't necessarily, hey, houseplant owners, only keep healthy plants in your home, but it was more directed towards designers, architects, building managers, and also homeowners, but that when you choose plants to have the maximum benefit for the well-being of the occupants in the business, in the home, or in the place you're designing, you want to create places that have lush, full greenery, and that is what will have the maximum benefit. And I kind of took that as, if I have houseplants that are dying or are dead and I'm kind of hanging on to them, trying to turn it around, it could be negatively affecting my well-being. Maybe for some people they like the challenge, but in this study it was shown that in general, people feel better around healthy, lush plants and not so great around plants that are dying. So if you needed an excuse to let a plant go, let that be your excuse. Studies are starting to prove that it's not good for you. All right, let's move on to study number 5. This one talks about how indoor plants can help meditation. The title of it, all these titles just sound so fancy when I really feel like they aren't that fancy, but the title of it is Effective and Cognitive Restoration, Comparing the Restorative Role of Indoor Plants and Guided Meditation. So what this study was investigating was whether indoor plants was as effective as guided meditation for helping psychological recovery after fatigue. And this fatigue was induced by what they called an abbreviated vigilance task. So they got 60 students. They were randomly assigned to an indoor plant, and they had a controlled rest break condition. How they measured the effect, they looked at stress levels, they looked at working memory levels before and after the vigilance task that they had assigned, and then again after the rest intervention that they had through the guided meditation, or for the others, through their time with the indoor plant. So what they found after exposure to their breaks, their distress signals significantly decreased with the indoor plants, and those in guided meditation, their distress also significantly decreased, but their engagement significantly increased. And they concluded that indoor plants and guided meditation had a small but significant positive impact on decreasing their distress and restoring themselves, but no significant impact on their cognitive restoration when they measured that. So from this study, what they kind of had in summary is that indoor plants can be a cost-effective way to provide that restful intervention in offices. And also that indoor plants were just as effective for a rest break as guided meditation was for a rest break for themselves. So quite interesting. If you are not into meditation, just spend some time with your indoor plants because it has some of the same effects. Or if you do both together, then maybe it's double the benefits. I don't know. That's not real research. That's just Rachel talking. All right, let's move on to our last study. This one is about how indoor plants help reduce our stress and it influences our eating habits. The title for this study was Indoor Nature Integration for Stress Recovery and Healthy Eating, a picture experiment with plants versus green color. So for this study, what they did is they got 92 people in the age range of 18 to 30 years old. They divided these people into 4 groups. So each of them had a 6-minute slideshow, and the slideshow contained pictures of rooms that either had green plants, or it just had green objects, or it had grayscale plants or grayscale objects, just so they could allow this distinction between color and the plant effects. And each of these groups, they tested them for how restored they felt on this scale that they had, and also their psychological recovery and their eating behavior. So to start the study, they were exposed to a stressor before the pictures, and then at the end, they reported their change of their stress levels, positive and negative effects, and they also had some psychophysiology tests going on, their heart rate and things like that. They did that post-slideshow versus pre-slideshow. And to monitor their eating behavior outcomes, they looked at their change in hunger, their change in cravings, and their food choices. These participants were looking at food choices of fruits and vegetables and snacks. So they did this whole study, and from the 4 picture sets, the people that were most mentally restored and seemed to have the most beneficial symptoms for post-stressor recovery and had positive effects going on were the people that saw the green plant pictures. And also, the green plant picture group had a higher preference for vegetables and a lower preference or cravings for other unhealthy snacks that they were showing them. The next group that had the more positive effects and also a more healthy inclination towards food were those that were exposed to the pictures of room with green color, with last place being the grayscale rooms. So the conclusion from this study was that indoor green plant pictures were associated with higher mental restorativeness and healthier food choices, and that integrating plants in the interior seems to be a relevant health promotion approach, while applying green colors seems less relevant. I feel like this whole podcast has just been me convincing you to get more houseplants, if anything, and get rid of your dead houseplants. But this one is so interesting that those people that were exposed to houseplants in these pictures felt like they could have healthier eating habits and were more drawn to eating vegetables, and also had reduced stress, which I feel like has been something that has been proven time and time again that houseplants can actually reduce our stress. I'm trying to think if, since I've gotten houseplants, if I'm more inclined to eat vegetables. I don't know about that, but regardless, I do think it's interesting, and I will add it to my back pocket of reasons why I have houseplants in my home. All right, so that was my 6 studies. I do have some honorable mentions where I'm just going to tell you what these studies found. I only have 2 of them. They were just studies that I was like, oh, that's cool, but I don't know if I want to spend a lot of time delving into it. So the first study that gets an honorable mention showed that houseplants can pick up trace amounts of nickel when they are in a smoking area versus non-smoking area, and some houseplants are better than others at doing that. I think the rubber tree they found to be most effective in smoking areas. And then the second study that gets an honorable mention that I wanted to talk about here is that they found that houseplants under natural lighting have more chlorophyll content versus plants under artificial lighting. Not artificial lighting like grow lights, but just your normal lights you find in businesses and in homes. The plants that were by the natural lighting had more chlorophyll to be able to convert more sunlight. Anyways, those are my studies for today. Perhaps this will be a little series that we do where every now and then I tell you about the newest studies that are coming out with houseplant research, how cool houseplants are, and how they can affect our lives, our mental well-being, our eating habits, all of that fun stuff. I just want to say thank you for listening to today's episode, and I hope that you will join me in 2 weeks for a brand new episode of the Plant School podcast. Thank you so much for being here and for listening to the Plant School podcast. I hope that you will join me for our next episode. And if you would like to support this podcast and keep it going, there's a link down in the show notes of this episode where you can donate to this podcast, and I really appreciate all that help. Or you can go to my merch store, which is also linked in the notes of this episode, and you can find some really cool plant-related shirts and stickers. And if you want to support the podcast but spend no money, feel free to share it with a friend, leave a review. All these things greatly help me out and allow me to keep doing this. Again, thank you so much for listening and for being here at the Plant School podcast.